Craig here for another edition of Now Age Conversations with Marie Burcham. Hey, Marie.
Good morning.
Marie's a farm and food policy analyst at the Cornucopia Institute. We're going to be discussing whether the USDA organic label is trustworthy. That's a heavy topic. The background here, a little bit. Washington Post, the past month, had two really good exposés. One about certified organic dairy. The other one about imported organic grains and soybeans coming from allegedly from Turkey, and in many cases they weren't organic, or the certification has been so watered down. So hopefully we can get into some of that. Just a little background for people who don't know, this whole conversation about USDA involved in organics. In 1990, the USDA, I guess the Congress passed the USDA, the act that required a certification, and it took about 10 years, maybe 11 years, for them to finally hash it out and for it to become law. Now, I remember back in 1990, the thought was, wow, it was a lot of skepticism around as to who this was going to benefit. And then probably a mutual friend of yours and mine, Joan Gussow, who was the head of the Organic Standards Board, representing the U.S. consumer during the hashing out of the what would be the distinctions of organic food on all different types of food products. She caught on quickly too, that this thing was really just to create and fortify a big organic industry, a commodification of organics. According to our friends at the Organic Trade Institute, in 2015, organic sales posted a new record of $43.3 billion in sales. And now we see, with the difficulty that Whole Foods is having with competition coming in from all different angles of big organics, creating downward pressure on costs, and that's going to create extra pressure also on the certification of organics, because everybody's just trying to make money while they can. The gold rush is on. So I don't know if I set that up properly in your mind.
Sounds great to me, yeah.
So what is the Cornucopia Institute? What's its mission? How do you get involved and all that? So be a little more about what you're doing over there.
Sure. So the Cornucopia Institute is a watchdog group for the organic industry. So we're looking at making sure the government is doing their job, regulating, or trying to make sure they do their job. And also just being sort of a voice for the consumers, doing our background investigations, giving that information to consumers and wholesale buyers so that they can make informed choices when they're buying. We definitely support the organic industry and what we feel is sort of the subset of it that is doing it ethically, that is who sort of did all the work. I was just talking to a dairy farmer yesterday who was saying exactly what we believe, which is, these big corporate organics are profiting off our hard work building this industry up from the ground. And that is the people who we're supporting, is these farmers who have really put their heart and soul into this ideal, which is clean, safe, humane food. And there are definitely some issues in the industry, but we're hoping to fight that. That's essentially what we're doing. So
great. So the first Washington Post expose about the organic dairy, which was really, and I have to go back and say it was not news to anybody who's been paying attention, because this goes back to, again, with conversations I've had with Joan Gussow, it goes back to the discussions they had right back in the 90s about what would be certified organic dairy, and she had trouble kind of getting to understand that grazing was essential to that. And now we see that that's been and people should read the piece, and hopefully you can kind of get a little of that. But the big bombshell that comes out of this is that the reason all this kind of shenanigans can happen is because the USDA does not hire the inspector. The inspector is hired by the farm. It sounds a little bit reminiscent of the subprime mortgage crisis, right?
correct, yeah. So the USDA essentially certifies the certifiers. And this is another area that is, there's a lot of potential for abuse. And that's not to say there are not good certifiers out there, but when money is on the line, some people are not going to take the ethical route. It's just the reality of our world today, apparently. So yes, the certifier issue, again, if the USDA was doing their job, potentially they would be more strict with how the certifiers are actually doing the certifying. But with this Aurora dairy, it's clearly not the case.
Right. Can you talk a little bit about who Aurora Dairy is? What sort of the details of what they were getting at in this article?
Yeah, so Aurora Dairy they are a big dairy primarily located in Colorado. And they've actually had issues with compliance and organics in the past. There's a lot of information on the Cornucopia website if people want to dig more into that. But essentially, they have had a history of not grazing. So in organics, just as a little background, you're required to graze a certain amount. There was a change to the rule made in 2010 where it essentially required a certain amount of grazing that wasn't required before. Grazing has always been required, but it wasn't a strict, hard-line rule of how much. So there was a lot of, pushing that to extremes that don't make sense. So before that rule was passed, people were, for instance, grazing their heifers, which are the dairy animals that are not currently being milked. They're the young dairy animals. And then the cows that were actually being milked were not getting any grass. So that's clearly a violation of the integrity of organics and the very idea that consumers have about organics. I mean, the idea is that these cows are out grazing, doing what they were intended to do naturally. So back to Aurora, has a history of not grazing and basically running their farm like what we see in conventional agriculture, which is with feedlots, intensive milking, lots of grain. And that was pretty much supported in this recent investigative report in the Washington Post, where they did, I think, 10 days of observations and saw very few of the cows out in grass. And they also did some milk testing, which showed that the milk looked more like conventional milk than organic milk.
Right.
And I don't know if you want me to say anything about the difference between organic and conventional milk, but I'd be happy to.
Sure, that's the essential fatty acid profile we're talking about here, right? Yeah, if you could
Correct,
go a little
yes.
bit about that, that's where it's. I mean, that's why people should be. I mean, there's two reasons that we want the cows and the animals to be treated properly and to have what is their normal life, which would be grazing, and then we also want to make sure we're getting the benefits. So
Right.
so the health benefits to the consumer, conventional milk versus milk from grazing cows now is what exactly?
So milk from cows that get the majority of their diet from grass has been shown to have, like you said, the essential fatty acids, which higher omega-3s, which, if you know, the American diet is very high on omega-6s, and we don't usually get enough of the omega-3s. We need both, but in general, the diet in America is too high in omega-6s, which is inflammatory and contributes to all sorts of disease. Conventional milk, because the cows are fed a lot of grain to support intensive milking, is high in omega-6s. When the cows graze, surprise, surprise, their milk becomes much higher in omega-3s and also has or can have CLAs, which is another fatty acid that has been implicated in all sorts of health benefits, heart health, eye health, some indications of cancer-fighting properties. Unfortunately, the milk you get from a cow can very rapidly change depending on how their diet changes. So if 1 day or 2 days they're given grain, the milk they get from those subsequent days will be drastically different. So that's something you have to keep in mind when you're doing milk tests at any point. That what the cow eats is ultimately what you eat, essentially. So that's a big reason to go for organic milk that has been, treated as though it's truly organic and ethically organic, which means the cows are grazing as much of the grazing season as they can.
Now, where this shows up on the retail end, so the Aurora tends to service the large-scale private label organics. And I'm not saying that literally Trader Joe's, Whole Foods, 365, Walmart, Costco, but those are the type
Right.
of large-scale private label. So you go into these stores, you see certified organic. The consumer, ultimately should not have to wonder, is it good organic or is it bad organic? Or is it real organic or is it sham organic? Is this just a marketing tool or what's going on here? But that, unfortunately, that's the case. Now, the great thing about the Cornucopia website is that you guys have this amazing rating system of dairy farms and also of eggs, which I always send people to. And, you think, and we did this test here last week in our home. And, the store locally, you can get locally, not organic, not certified organic, pastured eggs, non-GMO pastured eggs. So I end up buying them because they're from a local farm. We filled in with some certified organic eggs from Trader Joe's. And I cracked the two eggs side by side. Right? The non-organic, locally, egg from a pastured chicken was this really rich gold yolk. The certified organic one from Whole Foods was this really watery thing that you would expect to get, at a diner or whatever. But it was, and you could just look at the two and say, well, wait a second. I mean, forget about labels or whatever. One looks like a heartier food than the other one.
Right. And I mean, there are similar differences between organic or pasture-raised eggs and grass-fed cows. So they have more omega-3s, they've got a lot more vitamin A. So there are, I mean, across the board, even if you're looking at beef, like meat itself, 100% grass-fed beef is also got all these health benefits that we're not getting when we're eating conventional food. Again, I like how you mentioned that entire list of things. Is it marketing tool, or is it true, or is there health benefits, or is that just a ploy? Unfortunately, all of these are true. All of these things are true, and it does take digging a little deeper. And that's the unfortunate reality. Just because it has the organic stamp on it doesn't mean it's the same. There could be different cartons with different prices, different brands, and they could all be completely different in how they're raised. What the organic label does require that is pretty reliable is that you're not going to get all the harmful chemicals, antibiotics, growth hormones, things like that you will be protected from, but from buying organic, even if it's from these less than ideal farms.
Yeah. So I mean, the question is how low does the bar have to go, or how high does it have to go? And again, it becomes a cost benefit analysis. And for a small farm doesn't have to answer to a board of directors. A small farm doesn't have to answer to shareholders. And then when you're dealing with publicly traded companies like Whole Foods, for instance, and I hate to make them out to be the villain, but they seem to be the driver of everything that has become difficult for anybody trying to keep integrity within the organic food movement. But I just lost where I was going with that, so I'm going to come back to that. But had a senior.
Well, I can say that Whole Foods is brilliant marketers. That's all I can say. I mean, they're good at that.
Yeah. I mean, it's terribly frustrating, And then the one thing I will say is that that how in the neighborhood where I live. Go back 20 years ago, there were 5 independent health food stores. Okay, now I can tell you there's 1, and then there's Whole Foods. And so there's really no place else to go unless you want to create a co-op, or you want to, do something more independent. The other story that came up was the organic grain story the Washington Post ran last week. Again, which is another shocker. Organic grain and soybeans, most of it grown to feed livestock, apparently, which is, of course, a whole other problem. But in order to be certified organic, they have to get certified organic grain and soybeans, corn and soybeans. And I guess a lot of this was grown domestically up till about 4 years ago. Was that the case? Like, a lot of this was domestically grown, right?
There has been a significant increase in grain imports, and a lot of that is due to just the demand being so much higher is that we're requiring, or not, again, requiring is iffy because, again, why are these animals getting so much grain? One, they shouldn't be if they're truly organic. They should be getting most of their diet from grass. But yeah, the market for domestic organic grain is pretty crazy. So there's high costs and there's not a lot of supply. So it's no surprise that people are looking for international sources for this grain. Unfortunately, there are big question marks whether a lot of it is truly organic. Now, I will say that it's very easy to do tests to see if something is GMO, and I know that's a concern for a lot of consumers. So this grain coming in more than likely is non-GMO still, but pesticides, herbicides, stuff like that, it's a little bit harder to test for that stuff, and so that is a big question whether it's really coming in clean, so to speak.
Yeah, well, the piece that the Washington Post ran was talking about how all of a sudden Turkey has become this incredible exporter of certified organic corn and soybeans, when a couple of years ago they were really a small player. So that raised eyebrows, I guess. And then I guess what they did at the reporters at the Washington Post, they traced back the shipments, and they weren't in fact grown in Turkey. They were grown in Ukraine, grown in Romania, and when these things kind of left their port or farm, all the paperwork showed that they were conventional corn and soybeans, and somehow they got to Turkey and they miraculously became organic.
Yes.
And luckily there were some in the importing here into the States. There was some filtering as to I guess depending on who the importer was or who the certifier was, there was some filtering to kind of catch it at the import level. But still, again, the demand has grown at such leaps and bounds. And it kind of brings me back to. We talked about the label. Is it a marketing tool, or can it be trusted? And hopefully we can kind of hold their feet to the fire, because we could ask, what is the mission? What should the mission be of the of USDA? And in my mind, it should have been created to build up a local food supply, to encourage your local food supply, to know your farmer, the whole thing that we envisioned it to be. Of course, that it didn't become. It became a packaged food industry where people can buy everything from packaged sugar frosted flakes and so on. I was at the Natural Food show a year ago, the annual trade show in Baltimore, and my question was, why is there so much organic sugar in every packaged organic food now? And the answer to that is because it's easier to kind of bring people over. But they use this line that, well, whatever it is, we're increasing organic agriculture in the United States. I think there's a lot of question as to whether that is actually true. Can you speak to that?
Well, there's definitely quite a lot of organic farm land in Mexico as well. And a new big thing, which doesn't necessarily apply to sugar, but is hydroponics organic, which is a big issue that Cornucopia is dealing with right now. Because a lot of the fruits, especially like salad greens and fruits, berries, is hydroponically grown now when you see it organic. And that's an easy way to get a huge volume of food in a small amount of land. But then, is it really organic? Because one of the tenets of organic is that you're supporting the soil, renewing of resources, all that jazz, carbon sinking, making the land better than you had left it. And hydroponics, while it might be great to feed a lot of people, is not in the soil and is not doing that. So a lot of the organic increase in production we see is actually coming from hydroponics and also these gigantic factory-style farms, which are doing monocropping and things that you would associate with conventional agriculture, not with the ideals of organics. So,
yeah. Again,
to me, that's debatable that that's truly organic, and I feel that that is a misuse of this label, and that is what we're kind of fighting against, is that misuse and misleading of consumers.
Yeah. One of my perpetual complaints is that if I want to buy organic sweet peppers and I go to the local Whole Foods and they're $5.99 a pound and they're imported from either Mexico, Canada, or Holland, right? But then I can drive to a farm about 10 minutes west of here, and in season they're growing sweet peppers, 4-6 months out of the year, and you can buy them for anywhere from 99 cents to $1.99 a pound. It's not a certified organic farm, but they call themselves a sustainable farm. The reason that they're not a certified organic farm because it's not cost effective for them to be a certified organic farm. So can you also speak to that impediment? In other words, we want it to be supportive of also small and local farmers, but most small and local farmers I know are, have given up on the organic label altogether. And consumers as well, kind of thoughtful consumers have also given up and are in the mindset that, I can't trust it. I'd rather go to my local farm, my farmer's market, and trust the local. And I can go to the farm and look at the farm and see the farm. It seems clean enough to me. At the same time, I don't have that added carbon footprint of flying something in halfway around the world. I asked Joan Gussow about this and the carbon footprint. Should we be having certified organic foods that have flown halfway across the world? And she admitted, she goes, we never thought, in the night that we'd even be discussing that now. But sure enough, we are.
Right. So, I think what really framed the idea for me was this conversation I had with this dairy farmer where they make cheese, and he says we make 50 cents, 20 cents profit once we actually sell this cheese, and we go to the stores and see our cheese is 20 cents more expensive than this conventional-esque organic brand, and they know that brand is making dollars on each piece of cheese, but the consumer will buy it because it's a little bit cheaper. And I think that pretty much highlights why farmers are not going into this, because right now there's such a push towards these bigger farms. And the bigger farms are very excited to be in organics because, again, they can charge that upsurge, even though they're really not spending that much more money than if they were conventional. Obviously, they're spending more money on organic grain because organic grain is much more expensive. But other than that, they're making a lot of money in organics, and that's why they want to stick around. That's why they keep pushing and lobbying for looser rules and whatnot. And if you think about it, why would a small farmer want to get into that where they're going to have to constantly compete with these people with greater economies of scale and no integrity? And the consumers who are interested in buying organics aren't necessarily invested in doing the research themselves. And of course, it's not surprising that people would spend a little less if they think they're equivalent. Unfortunately, they're not equivalent. And the organic small farmer is sort of a dying breed. We do have, or we're going to have, some help for consumers on our website for do-it-yourself organics for people who want to know what questions to ask their local farmers who may not be certified but who are sort of more organic than some of these big farms, for questions to ask to make sure that they're actually getting stuff that hasn't been sprayed and hasn't been, doesn't have GMOs or whatever their concern may be. Because we recognize it as an issue. A lot of small farmers are not doing organics and they're just relying on consumer connection, essentially, which is how it used to be before organics was, a federal law.
Yeah, yeah, and there is within a segment of the organic foods movement, the biodynamic farming movement, or whatever. I was fortunate enough to grow up around one, and that many CSAs, community supported farms, now are operating, choosing a biodynamic model. Which is an intensified form, we'll say, of organic farming, and adheres to a whole different certification standard. So does Cornucopia get involved or have any sort of viewpoint on biodynamics and in a way of promoting that as a viable, as a trustworthy alternative?
So Biodynamics has their own certification, and they actually do certify organic farms, and a lot of biodynamic farms are also certified organic. But they're not the same. The emphasis is different. So it really depends on what the consumer is seeking. Biodynamic is a little bit more about, the local, making sure everything you get is within the small area you're in, which is certainly admirable, but they, again, don't have the same emphasis as. I think biodynamic is great, and I'm glad that it is out there. And as far as my information is known, is that they're pretty trustworthy. I also talked to some people that work for Demeter, and they're very transparent, which is, for us, a big hallmark of ethical food production is they're willing to show you their inner workings. So we do support biodynamic, but it's not our focus.
Yeah, got it. So what should the mission of the organic program, in your mind, what should, if we could go back and start it all over again, and we see now, all the pitfalls that, all the fears that we had going back to 1990, that this would just could create a huge organic industry. The worst fears have come true. Mm-hmm. If we could go back and start it in clean slate and do it all over again with a new act, basically, how would you see, what would that look like to you?
Well, as a disclaimer, I'm an attorney, so my perspective on this might be different than some of my colleagues. But in my mind, the biggest issue right now is enforcement. We need better enforcement, and that isn't so much of a rewriting of the rules, although there are certainly areas that I think the rules could have been better written from the beginning. I'm in favor of strict regulation and strict enforcement if you're actually going to have something that's federally regulated, like the organic program. So for me, it's all about enforcement and pushing for that, maybe making the regulations more strict as far as enforcement is concerned from the get-go. And honestly, I think the evolution of the organic rules has been fairly natural. It's been slow at times, but that's federal law for you. So it's okay to sort of adjust in flight, as it were. But we need to respond to these emerging threats to the organic label as they're happening. So this threat of dairies or big operations like Aurora, they're going to kill this, because if the organic label is completely supported by people that buy into it. If people stop buying into it, it's going to fail. And if that requires better regulation, great. But the thing is, even if you have great laws, if they're not enforced, it doesn't matter. So in my mind, enforcement is what we need to go toward.
Yep, and sadly, the current administration is very interested in pulling money out of the USDA organic program right now. So then, what's a consumer to do? I always send people over to your website or to the Organic Consumers Association website. Beyond that, I don't really know what's out there as far as activist groups who are really organized and really grounded in helping consumers to really discern what, who's fighting for them, and what is the battle, what is the fight. To us, it's pretty clear. I'm hoping by this conversation, more people will kind of get a sense of, well, wait a second, we're being kind of, this little, card game going on here, and we're losing it. So what is a consumer to do in this case, taking into account everything that we just talked about?
Right. So I do think our scorecards are great, and actually we are redoing our dairy scorecard if people are specifically interested in dairy. So a new survey that emphasizes the grass idea even more, so the grass feeding and grass fed, and emphasizing that end of it, because that's becoming sort of what's differentiating the conventional organic and true organic is the pasturing. So I always recommend our scorecards. We're also going to have a new dairy report, which talks about all of the new issues that are rising in the dairy industry. And we have other reports for eggs and soy and all sorts of things that you want to check out. I'd highly recommend that. In the future, we have a meat bird, so poultry report and scorecard as well coming out, and also one for beef. So we're working on these things right now. And if consumers ever want something specific that they're concerned about, feel free to email us at our general email, cultivate@cornucopia.org. And we also have a free newsletter that you can sign up for, and we do action alerts and whatnot. Another thing I would recommend is I know it's a lot of work, but if you can just stay engaged. So that means seeing what's coming out of the National Organic Standards Board, commenting on it if you're interested in the topic. So the National Organic Standards Board is the body that sort of recommends courses of action to the USDA. So if the consumer can stay engaged with them through public comment, that can be very valuable. They always want to hear from consumers and farmers, and businesses, everyone, regardless of what your opinion is. And also staying engaged with your purchasing choices. So we talked a little bit about the store brands, the private label brands. Be skeptical about them. I'm not saying they're all bad, but be skeptical, because unless they're willing to be transparent with you, they're probably getting some of their milk from these factory organic farms. Same with eggs, same with anything. Go to your farmers, find which farmers are local to you, and ask to visit their farms. If they don't want you to visit their farms, then be suspicious. I guess I'm just saying, be suspicious, ask questions. Organics still has a lot of life in it, and I think we should try and preserve it. But it's going to take a lot of work from everyone, from policymakers, from lawmakers, from consumers. I mean, every time someone buys a gallon of milk on the shelf, it's saying something about what they want from the organic industry.
Yep. And I should also add here now that Cornucopia Institute needs support, right? You guys accept donations in order to keep your work going. I mean, all this incredible work that we just talked about. So people can go to your website, which I'll link to, and they can also give a financial support, which I'm sure is a tax-deductible donation.
Yes.
So I will link to that, and that also people can support us, because we like support too, and there's links to all those things. So I thank you so much for your time and your expertise.
Thank you.
It's been great. I really want to keep this conversation going because there's so much distraction about things that are non-essential that are rising to the top, and these essential things kind of fall to the back pages. So thanks so much. Have a great day. Continue the good fight.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.